Okay. Got the Grinch hat on. Because I'm a Grinch. I prefer to celebrate certain festivals like Feast of Tabernacles and Passover above, I'd say, Christmas and Thanksgiving, just because, in my understanding, they're not outdated. They're not sort of done away with. They're actually um, partially completed, or they represent things that haven't even fully happened yet. So, for example, Feast of Tabernacles, in my understanding, represents something that has yet to happen in the future. Um, Even though Passover was something that happened in Egypt, but then it happened again in the past, but a far thousands of years afterwards, it happened as a different type of event, which had to do with Jesus dying. So that's why I'm wearing the Grinch, because it's not because I'm against Christmas. It's just what I'm against is when people say, how could you possibly not want to celebrate Christmas? But then at the same time, they'll say, well, you don't need to keep Feast of Tabernacles. Well, you don't need to keep. That's the type of thinking that I don't understand. Because in my understanding, there's two types of holidays. There's a type of holiday which God invented and represents something. And then there's a type of holiday that mankind invented. And if you actually notice the important events that happen in Christianity, they happen on the timeline that God had already invented, and he had already described. So I'm basically just saying, like, look, I don't have anything against Christmas, but don't come to me and say that it's wrong for me to celebrate a holiday that I understand God to have specifically commanded, but then expect me to keep a holiday that he doesn't even really tell anyone to keep. So that's my understanding of it. So then I wore a Grinch hat to kind of be a Grinch, and at the same time, I gave my niece a little stuffed animal. So I'm a nice Grinch who likes to give gifts anyway, regardless of Christmas time or not. So, guys, 10 years ago, holy crap, why do I have 19 people watching this? Anyway, 10 years ago, I started posting on this channel these calculator programming videos. And I was a student at University of Illinois, so it was actually a way for me to relax my mind. I actually was not trying at all. It was just me relaxing. So some people would comment and they would say, hey, why don't you try coding in C? Well, I was actually teaching other students who were my peers at the university how to, you know, how to do these C++ data structures problems for their course. And these students went on to be, interns at Amazon and Google and things like that. So, my subscribers on YouTube, they didn't realize, I'm into that kind of stuff. And also around, 5+ years ago, I was making, my parse tree editor. I was interested in Haskell and things like that. And in the last 5 years, I have my own project. Now I happen to have written it in C, but what it does is it lets you write things in lambda calculus and it reduces the expressions for you. So you can play around with stuff in lambda calculus, but I don't make videos about it. I mean, I might be able to, but it's like, people don't always make videos and explain everything they're doing as they're doing it. I mean, you know, that's why you have things that just show up all of a sudden, like Bitcoin. You have a paper and then you have a Genesis block. Yeah, there's evidence that people were working on stuff, but they weren't going out and just flaunting it for the world to see on social media and on the news. They were just doing, the research, getting business partners, whatever. So, uh, my subscribers, when I asked questions on a quiz, I asked these different questions of, hey, what should I do for more income? And you guys all answered with all these other answers, but it's like nobody voted for me to do like a Kickstarter to do, a business. And it's not necessarily that I never told anyone about these ideas. It's that these ideas are the type of thing that they don't take off in people's minds for a lot of people, until they see it. It's like one of those things where like nobody really cares until they actually see it, when they make the iPhone. And then Steve Jobs, he said, we're going to make it not how people are saying, what people are saying they want. We're going to make it this particular way because I know that it's going to work. Because he knew people need a camera, they need a cell phone, they need a pager, and they're going to use something that combines them all together into one product because it's easier to carry it around in your pocket. It's cheaper. So, yeah, I don't know if there's like ghost subs or something, or what happens with the YouTube algorithm, because it shot up to like 20 people and then it dropped down to 3 people. So, my content, when I'm just talking on the camera, obviously it's not that interesting. I don't just listen to other people who are talking to camera. But right now, if I'm honest, that's what I have to do with my time. I don't have anything to really show you guys to be like, hey, look what I made. But I don't know, maybe I could make a video where I show like a land of readers or whatever. But I've already made my different videos explaining ideas and stuff. And I think the day will have to come when I do have something made and people are going to realize, hey, this works better. This parse tree editor tool works better than my traditional software development stuff. That's what they'll have to do. How many of you guys know my dog's name? Baby, come here. Come here, sis. Come here. Look, this is my dog. She's in an uncomfortable position right now because I'm having a pull. How many of you guys know that I found this dog in Arizona? Yeah. She's still panting because I took her in the car and I drove like 15 miles an hour. She was running with me. Gorgeous. Yeah. So running with me. Yeah. So stinkies. You're a stinky puppy. You're a stinky puppy. Even when I give you baths, you get stinky really fast, don't you? Yeah. Get stinky really fast. Dogs get stinky really fast, don't they? Even if you give them a bath, they get stinky. They're smelly creatures. But they make good friends, in my opinion. I don't believe they make good food. And against a lot of people's opinions, I don't think that pigs actually make good food. There's other people on YouTube who are way better at explaining that than me, especially Walter Veith. He made a very good explanation, not only of the biology and his specific tests with toxicity, but explaining all the kind of this theology behind it too. But all I know is that I can trust my nose enough, and when I stopped eating any type of pig-based meat, if you want to call it meat, if somebody else cooks it, I can smell it. And it's not like it used to be where I couldn't really tell, it all just smells the same. No, this is like it's like somebody went to an outhouse and collected some stuff and they started cooking it on the stove. So that's true, and I've heard that from other people. They've said the same thing. When they stopped eating it, they started to smell it. And it doesn't smell like chicken or beef or these other things. It smells different. And you can it's not like it always like without fail, but it's like when you do smell something, it's like then you know that's what it is. And so um I used to be extremely organized when I was younger. Were you guys ever the same way? Were you ever kind of like me, where you're like, as a child, you're kind of like this engineer type thinker? You have like a mathematical mind, or maybe you're like, you try to organize things a lot. My mom has this picture of me as a child, and I have like this little train that I made of all these little toys, and each toy in this picture, it looks so weird because you just see this little boy like kind of sit, like really little boy with blonde hair just kind of smiling there, right? It's me, but like he's next to these toys, but but there's like I don't know how many, like 8 of these little toy plastic cars or whatever these are, these little things you can ride, and they're all perfectly in a straight line. I mean, down to like it's like you can't tell, it's down to the millimeter. They're just like perfectly in a straight line, and they're all like bumper to bumper. I don't see that with other children. But apparently that's like what I would do. I would like, and I remember I would separate Legos by like their colors and stuff. Um, and then I remember my room only had so much space that I was forced to figure out how to organize everything, even though there was a lot of like junk, like a lot of stuff that today maybe I'd consider half of it junk. But at the time, I valued whatever it was. Like if it was a toy, I was just like, oh, it's a toy. You just have to have a place for it. If it's a book, you have to have a place for it. And every single thing found its place. Pero no cry. No cry. Why are you crying? Come here. Every single thing had its place. And I had essentially a library in my room, which was not that big of a room. And if somebody were to move some little thing, little object, or little book, I could tell because all the books were in like height order. And um, I refined the way that I actually approach this. So right now, in where I've been at in life, is I've kind of at mid 30s, I've kind of been the opposite. I've kind of been like almost purposely not organizing things, and it's really long story, really long, complicated process. But if you rewind, say, a little more than 10 years ago, I had some roommates. Well, yeah, I had roommates, and I also had like a kind of like a church friend. And there was a couple people that basically I went in there. They were not hoarders. These two guys, at least, they were not hoarders. They didn't have a lot of stuff. They weren't like me where I had a little more than I had been in the army, so I had more stuff from Okinawa and stuff. But there was these guys that were just kind of students with not too much stuff, kind of fit in their little room. Pero stay there, sister. Stay. And I went in there and I organized everything in their room for them. And this involved basically, if I knew it was trash, I could throw it out. Throw it out. If I didn't know it was trash, then it wouldn't be fair for me to throw it out, right? And if for their papers and stuff, it's not really fair for me to read through somebody's personal papers, but I can kind of glance at something, put it in a folder, and kind of, you know, leave that aside. Remember, these two guys were not hoarders. They did not have a lot of stuff. They just had like some basic stuff, and they left their room messy. One of them was my roommate, and he had some chinchilla pets, and for some reason he just never got around. He was a Chinese grad student, so he's kind of smart, nice guy. He just was a little busy, and then his chinchillas just kind of got out and left all these droppings all over the place. Well, I cleaned everything up, right? Everything, and when I clean it, it's like the bed's made, the clothes are washed, whatever, everything's folded, everything's put away, everything's kind of where you would expect something to be if it's where it should be. And there's a way to approach problems, I guess. You can be kind of like this extreme perfectionist, but unless you understand reality properly, or you know how to say, like, you try to represent everything with math. If you don't know how to do that, if you don't know how to even model the approach to that, then you start doing that wrong. So it's kind of like when the mathematicians go too far into the extreme and they say, well, we can't have democracy because of Arrow's theorem. It's like, you don't even understand what Arrow's theorem is saying. It's saying if you assume all these criterion are equal, like, mean the same thing, which they don't, or they're not as any more important than each other, which they are, then, this is the conclusion, right? So they separate it too much. They don't know how to they're not actually doing it properly, right? So, with understanding how to approach this problem, I needed some way of kind of not just applying some obsessive compulsiveness or whatever it was to cleaning their rooms. It was actually approaching the problem in a way that made sense. And one of the things that involved was, how do I organize the remaining miscellaneous stuff, right? Because once you say you have a basic solution to taking care of dirty clothes, clean clothes, you fold them, whatever, you hang them up if they have a collar, whatever. You have all these basic things, right? And I'm not claiming to be that smart, because you see YouTube videos and people blow me away at anything. It doesn't matter, like these games and stuff. But you could pick anything. It doesn't matter what it is. And you could pick math. You could just say point to Ramanujan, right? It doesn't matter. People fill out these extremes in intelligence. But I need to figure out, how do I approach it in a way that makes sense to organize their miscellaneous stuff, because I can't, just randomly just organize any miscellaneous stuff, right? But there is kind of a way to describe it that's very simple, and it works, and you could make it like a method, and it's not complicated. It's kind of like when they invented the IQ test. It's like, you think it's going to be some sophisticated thing, but in reality, it's just like testing your pattern matching skills. And it happens to be orders of magnitude more, predictable than these other personality tests, because it's actually legit. And that's why it annoys me when people online are say things like, well, it doesn't matter, IQ. Yeah, that's the whole point. That's why they used it, is because it actually worked well. Otherwise, they wouldn't have used it in the army. So anyway, when you think about objects that are miscellaneous, how do you use those objects? Well, you need to go searching through them, basically. What's an easy way to do that? Well, if you have big objects mixed with tiny objects, then you can't find the tiny objects, because you have to move, like, this big soccer ball out of the way to find, like, this little bead, right? So basically what I did was, I would go to Walmart and get these containers, and somehow I'm able to figure out, intuitively, I know how to buy containers that are like the right amount. And I don't even know why. But it's like, I can tell whenever I need like cardboard boxes, it's like I buy exactly how many I end up needing, like perfectly. It's like weird. So, uh, anyway, I get these containers. I like the plastic containers. You can put them in under a bed, or you can put them in the closet. And you separate the items in the room that are miscellaneous, which means they're not paper, they're not trash, they're not clothing, they're other stuff. And you put everything that's bigger than a soccer ball, right? And you separate it into one container. Everything that's smaller than a soccer ball but bigger than a tennis ball goes in another container. And then everything that's smaller than a tennis ball goes in the third container. Now, this is still following Zipf's law. So this doesn't mean 100% of the objects. This means like 80% of the objects. Because you use 20% of the stuff 80% of the time, and 80% of the stuff basically 20% of the time, according to Zipf's law. So those would be like the objects that are on top of your dresser, or those are like the objects that are, in a drawer somewhere like accessible because you're using it. It's on your desk. You're using it very consistently all the time. So it would actually be counterproductive to try to put it somewhere like in a closet or under a bed. But that other 80% of the stuff, it's got to be more of a storage. And you want to make it accessible, right? Efficiency is. I always believe that efficiency comes before form, and it's funny because when they were interviewing down at Blue Origin, that's what Mr. Amazon was saying there about the rockets. He was saying, he was pointing out how when you engineer the rocket past the 99%, then its form just follows. It falls into place. Whether that's true, I haven't really thought about it. I'm assuming that Bezos is a little more intelligent than me. Like he thinks that I like a lot of ways of how he thinks. Doesn't mean that I agree with him or I like everything about him or whatever by default. It, you know, but I can appreciate, when he points things like that out. Uh, it doesn't necessarily mean he's doing everything, anything necessarily better than SpaceX or higher quality or whatever. I don't really know how to compare all of those things. I know that SpaceX does a lot more testing, and a lot of people will just say SpaceX is winning everything and Blue Origin is failing at everything. But, you also have to take timelines into account. I mean, BSV is not going to be scaled for another few years because they're just getting Terra nodes started. So, apps and other things like that can come after, I suppose. So anyway, but he's got a point, right? That's my point. You engineer that last 99% and then the form kind of follows. I don't know if that's how it actually works with the 99%, but I do know that it doesn't make sense to do things without the function. Like, to me, that you can't have form without function. That's sort of the way I've thought. I mean, really, that's how I feel it really is like, if there's no function, then you don't really have, you can't even, I don't even know how you can consider it good form. So, when I mean function for cleaning a room, right, you don't just have the room looking nice, you have the room efficiently working for someone, which means when you need to get your stuff is going to be accessible and you're going to be able to find it. And either you're going to know where all your stuff is, or it's going to be in a way that's easy to find. So, for example, let's just break it down very simply. In computer science, when you're just creating data structures and you're storing data, you can store data just by adding it all together and clumping it. And then you can search for something by just sifting through all the data to find it. But if you can somehow categorize it, or you can put it in a list, let's say you just have numbers, and you order them, it's going to cost a tiny bit more to keep them ordered. But it's not going to cost that much more, especially not compared to when having to search for those numbers. So when you start having to search for it and then find, that information, and that becomes a thing that you do more in your data structure, obviously, you can actually formalize that and get a big O. You can get an amortized, exact kind of expression representing precisely the growth rate of how much searching you're going to end up having to do in a data structure. And that's how it is with a room. You have all the stuff that you need to access in your room, and you want to make sure that 20% that you use the most is there and accessible immediately. And then you want to make sure the other 80% is grouped in such a way where the large objects, this is why I do it by size, because you can categorize things all sorts of different ways. But when it comes to miscellaneous stuff, unless you have another way of categorizing because you have a million of something, right? Unless you have a very specific set of things like Legos, you put them together. Unless you have that, then the most default, if default can be a quantized thing, the most default categorization of these things would be size. You want big, medium, and small. Because then it's the easiest to search through, the three-dimensional objects. That's why. So you don't organize things by color. You don't organize things by shape, because those don't necessarily help you find something more quickly. Yeah, you can say, oh, the thing I'm looking for is red. Yeah, but if it's tiny and it's in a bag of lots of big red things, then you're still going to have problems finding the tiny thing, because that's why it's difficult to find the small things, because they don't work. It doesn't work well when you have a lot of junk together that's different sizes. So why am I explaining all this? This is kind of how problems need to be approached. And not everyone will recognize when somebody else approaches problems in a good way. Because a lot of people like to just judge personality based on how they just feel, they call it vibes or whatever. But when you're solving specific types of problems, like, look, Apple was all over Mark Rober. They're like, yeah, I want you to run this company. But they probably wouldn't hire me to be a janitor if I wanted to. Because my personality doesn't come across as, oh yeah, that guy is going to be good at, running this, type of department or leading this type of research. That nobody likes a lot of these types of personalities, or at least most of them don't. And I feel like that's kind of true for Craig. And maybe, that's okay, but like, he's got to have had some people that have worked with him, whether he hired them as staff or, he's found some, different enough people. And I like a lot of these people. A lot of the Bitcoin SV people that I ran into, I like them personally. I prefer them 10 to 100 to 1,000 times more as friends than I would a lot of these other like BTC people and other people. And I've tried to work with people. I even have family, like extended family, who, jumped on saying, hey, it's more likely Adam back than Craig. But this is the same person that I tried to teach my grammar. I came up with a lambda calculus grammar, and so that it's not ambiguous. Because remember, I made that project I was talking about where you can write code in lambda calculus and it reduces. Well, I came up with two more kind of syntax for definitions of lambda calculus. I should publish them on Wikipedia and be like, hey, I get Tim Swan invented, this lambda calculus. There's a I like the it's kind of a variant on the De Bruin indices, um, but it's more I used parentheses or I used other symbols, but I use them in such a way uh, that um, you unambiguously can understand exactly how to parse like which function is applied to which other function in lambda calculus, which is different than the order of evaluation. That's why it's really confusing. But why am I talking about lambda calculus? Because it's a base computation system. Everyone who's genuinely into like logic and computer science, logic related things should definitely consider making sure they fully comprehend a logic system like that. Because if you don't, then I don't know what it's like saying like you don't know natural numbers and arithmetic, but you want to be a mathematician or something. Like it's one of these base I like it's a very basic thing to expand on. Um, I mean, even I would say like it's simpler. Like instead, like if you think about it, if you do some basic math for someone who says, "Okay, let's just start with the basics," they might say, "Okay, 1 + 1 = 2." Okay, well, I'll say, "Yeah, that sounds simple, but you just defined plus, you just defined equals." Hold on a second. You're already using two different logic systems. You have this whole idea of equals has to submit itself to Boolean algebra. So you have to deal with all the truth tables of truths and falses. So and, or, nor, all that to be able to reason about different statements about whether things are equal or not equal. Greater than or less than, right? Because you got comparisons. But you have to reason about the propositions themselves. And then you also have arithmetic. So you have the naturals, right? So you have the successor function, and then you have addition. And you get all your complexity when you combine addition and multiplication. But it's really complicated now because now your meta definition of everything, the way you interpret everything, has like 2 or 3 logic systems. Whereas in lambda calculus, it's one logic system and that's it. You have one logic system and it expresses all of that stuff. Adding types, Boolean, quantifying, successor, all that stuff. And you haven't had to add anything. It's all there in lambda calculus already. And so, and I'm not saying that you're supposed to do addition in lambda calculus. What I'm saying is the nature of being able to handle complexity on its own is important to kind of tackle. So the reason why we have all these messy operating systems and things like that is because people don't take the time to just meditate, study, and think and just clear their mind, but in a more determined way, a more disciplined way. If you can't come to the conclusion of like, oh yeah, that's a better way to represent types and sets and things like that, lambda calculus, right? You won't come to this conclusion of like, oh yeah, calculus of inductive constructions, it's always normalizable. We should do our proofs. We can start constructing code with that. There are people who understand this, and I know they exist because there is a project called like Lambda Cube 3D, and it it works. It's so cool because you can actually change. You can hot swap like as you got 3D stuff being rendered, right? They're actually using these type systems as a basis for a language that they're using to define to tell the graphics card like what to do, basically. So it's really cool because you can change the code and it will change what's happening on the in the web interpreter. But what's nice about it isn't it's not my idea where you can do the formal transformations with the parse tree editor. Para state. No command, state. But it is where when you do get the types to match up, the everything is expressed in a way that makes sense. You don't have all this type inferencing that you don't know what the heck is going on. Everything is designed to kind of fit together. It's just a more sophisticated type system. It's like saying we're gonna make a 3D game, but we don't want to study quaternions. You know, those are complicated. They're 4-dimensional Mobius strip type shapes. We don't need quaternions. We're just going to use, spherical coordinates. Right? But that's stupid. Because if you think about it, it's simpler. Go try to code a camera angle with quaternions. I'm telling you, it's simpler because you're just multiplying matrices. You're just multiplying numbers. You don't have to do all these like sine, cosine. You don't have to do all this trigonometry. You just have to accept that you're solving a problem in 4 dimensions of complex numbers, and that there's actually 2 coordinates for every camera angle that's with a tilt. There's actually 2 sets of numbers that represents that same camera angle. And as long as you realize that and accept it, you will have the sophisticated system. You won't have all this complicated, bad interpolation, right? Look up how they programmed the camera angles for the original Half-Life game. Look it up if you don't believe me. Look it up. They use quaternions. And that's what they should use for rockets. You better bet your butt SpaceX better be using quaternions. Otherwise, I'm going to think they're fools. Because with all that money, you better know how to just code a stupid quaternion to get your rocket. And don't use roll and spherical coordinates and all that stuff. Use quaternions. 1,000 times smarter. Yes, they're weird, they're 4-dimensional, and it's hard for humans to conceptualize them, but that's not why you use them. You don't use them because it's easier for a human to conceptualize them. Because you can always convert those into spherical coordinates for some human to look at. That's the part that people don't want to accept. They don't want to think about and realize that that's how it works. They don't want to realize that it's not just as simple as keep it simple, stupid. It's not that simple. But that doesn't mean you sacrifice the ability to have simplicity where you need it. Should we redesign an operating system from the ground up? Sure. Should we redesign things like code editors, source editors, and be able to make smart contracts in them? Sure. Yes, we do need to do all that. Do we need to redo? I mean, we need to redo everything. So, what does that have to do with cleaning room and organizing stuff? I don't know. I had to use, it's a meta circular reasoning. Look up what a meta circular interpreter is. Because you're not just making a new programming language, you're making an entire system. It's like a weird Lispy way of thinking about it. So do I want to do that? Yeah, I want to remake all this stuff, but I want to use those skills that I had organizing, but to understand the skills themselves. So let me cut this off at like 40 minutes, not go for an hour, and we'll talk next time.